All right, guys, let's move on to topic 3 now. The UFC announced on Saturday that Donald Cerrone will be inducted into the Hall of Fame this July. And he's joining an impressive 2023 class that includes Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo, and Jens Pulver. Now, unlike those guys, Cerrone never won a UFC title, never won a WC title, and those guys also have title defenses. But Cowboy, he's always been a fan favorite, always known as an action fighter. And so, let's start with you here. Is this deserved for Cowboy Cerrone? And if it is, what is it that makes Cowboy worthy of the Hall of Fame?
Man, I'm old school, guys. So look, I'm used to Hall of Fames being stacked with excellence, the creme de la creme. When you hear a name being announced, you say, man, that guy was unstoppable, wasn't he? Back in his day, he would shut people down. Nobody could keep up with this individual. Now, you have to look at this Hall of Fame a little differently, right? Because as far as selection goes, it's a little different the way they do this. The UFC is the ones that dictate who go in and out. It's not independent. So you have to factor in a different factor that sometimes doesn't get talked about. And it's, what did you mean to the company? If you add that part in, then the footprint that Donald Cerrone has is pretty massive, right? Ticket sales, his walkout at any time, any place, all the fight bonuses. Because if you have no title, then you have to present some sort of records, right? Things that you've done. In other Hall of Fames, we have guys like Charles Barkley, Dan Marino, Ken Griffey Jr. They don't have titles, but what they do have are stats and records to back that up. So what this does, I believe, is it does kind of open a little bit of a Pandora's box, because if you're going to let Cowboy Cerrone in with no title, well, now you're going to have to look at guys that have similar careers, right? The Jim Millers of the world, the Joe Lozons who have been company guys, tons of fights, tons of bonuses. People show up because they're on the card. You start to open it up to them. And what makes things kind of tricky is if you're on that stage and you put on your jacket and you look to the left and there's George St. Pierre there, and you look to the right and you got Anderson Silva and you're looking around and Chuck Liddell, do you stand up to those guys? Do you feel like you're in the same class as them? That's pretty difficult, man. So right now I'd have to say, in the schemes of if this were a non-UFC Hall of Fame, just an MMA Hall of Fame, I don't think you would get in. But if you look at it the way the UFC presents their Hall of Fame, then yeah, I think he is deserving of that.
It's interesting that you made the comparison you just made, because here, I might blow your minds with this when I say this, but I don't think there's much of a difference between Donald Cerrone and Jim Miller, is there, in terms of in the cage?
I don't think so.
But I can't make a case for Jim Miller as a Hall of Famer. I don't know if I think Donald Cerrone is a Hall of Famer, but I can make a case. That's kind of weird, right? Like, they're kind of the same fighter, but I can only make a case for one. I don't know. I kind of blew my own mind there. Mike, what do you think, man? Donald Cerrone, doesn't have the titles, doesn't really have sustained excellence for a long period of time, but he's getting in. What is it that makes him Hall of Fame worthy, if you think he is?
Yeah, I do think he is. I mean, if we're going by what Go said there, which is the only thing that really matters in this conversation, right? Like, this is the UFC's Hall of Fame. They can do whatever they want with it. They can bring people in under whatever criteria. I wrote in my takeaways column, and Go said it multiple times there. If it's an MMA Hall of Fame, it's a different discussion, maybe different criteria, different people voting. But for what Donald Cerrone is, I mean, how could he not be? Look at this sizzle reel right here. I mean, some absolutely awesome moments from him. He brought this whole mentality that's being adopted by an entire generation of fighters, right? Like, I'm willing to step up and do this and do this. Fighting multiple times within weeks of each other. Like, he did so much that I think made him stand out and have more value to the promotion and to like fans than maybe even some champions have had over the years. So yeah, I think Donald Cerrone, like, to me, easy what he's done, like the fights he's put on, the big fights he had. Yeah, maybe he lost more of them than he won, but he had a lot of great moments, man. And like, he put together an 8-fight winning streak to get to his title shot. Arguably could have had it a little bit earlier than he did. And not many people are putting together 8-fight winning streaks in the UFC, especially with the schedule that he did. So he may not have got that belt, but he did things that a lot of other people in the organization failed to accomplish many times over. So like, this is just such a layup to me. Maybe did it have to happen this soon, like 1 year after his retirement? That's a whole other different discussion that we referenced, a couple weeks ago. I would like there to be some sort of actual window between
period of appreciation, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. And like, we hear Nolan here, like we've heard rumblings over the past year of like, oh, is Donald Cerrone going to do this? Like maybe a thing, an offer here or there. I said this a couple weeks ago. We had Jose Aldo being announced on the broadcast to go in, and like 10 seconds later, they're promoting his boxing debut on UFC Fight Pass, and it just like doesn't feel like it's real. Right. So I would have maybe liked to wait another year or something. There's plenty of other people that could have gone in, but he was going to go in one day regardless. So I'm completely cool with it.
Well, Anselm in the chat says Donald Cerrone is the people's champ. And that's certainly something that I can appreciate, being the people's champ. That usually implies that's a fighter that the people enjoy. That's a fighter that the people love. They appreciate what they do in the cage. And I want to be very clear here in when I cast any sort of doubt about Donald Cerrone's Hall of Fame status, just because of my I'm kind of with Ghost. I have high standards for Hall of Fames in general. I realize this one's different than traditional sports Hall of Fames. So I want to be clear, even though I may cast some doubt about Donald Cerrone's Hall of Fame worthiness, that dude brought it every single time. And I certainly appreciate and respect what he did all of those years in the cage. So Nolan, let's go ahead and close it out with you here. What's your take here? Do you Mike says it's a layup. Mike says it was easy. Do you agree? Is this an easy call to get Donald Cerrone in the Hall of Fame?
I mean, when I first heard of it, the first word that went through my mind was perfect. I think that, as you just said a minute ago, this is different than other sports. I wasn't really sure what the UFC Hall of Fame's identity would be when the pool was so small, but now that it's starting to fill out, I think that they're actually nailing it. And I'm somebody that a lot of times thinks that, it's very black and white when it comes to matchmaking, when it comes to fighters getting title shots, that guys should be, based on the best should fight the best, that sort of thing. But I think the promotion side, when you're talking about the Hall of Fame, there's these intangibles that make fighters special. And when you look at their whole career body of work, Donald Cerrone was really special. There are things that he did that revolutionized the mindset, I think, of a fighter, that anywhere, like Mike said, anywhere, anytime, any place, anyone, that whole thing. There's nobody that exemplified that better than Cowboy. And just the amount of fights that he had, the amount of big names that he fought, to me, I was not shocked. I thought it was something that would happen sooner or later. And I think that he's truly one of a kind. So I would like to see the UFC continue to kind of, not necessarily everybody that gets a belt, oh, you're going to go to the Hall of Fame too. Like there has to be those guys that, he wasn't a superstar. He didn't extend necessarily that much outside of our MMA bubble, perhaps, but he was a star. And I think that those people should be recognized too, especially when you factor in longevity. So definitely, I agree with Mike. Maybe should have waited a couple more years or something, but he was getting there one way or another, and it just happens to be now.
Yeah, let me just note real quick, Simon. Records in every sport, things get surpassed, and you drop down the column. But just for Donald Cerrone, I mean, the first fighter with 35 UFC fights, the first fighter to reach 20 UFC wins, which is like a bigger group. First fighter to reach 15 UFC finishes. First fighter to reach 15 UFC bonuses. So like those are landmarks that, like he'll drop down as more guys go, and he's out of the sport. But like he was the first one to hit these landmarks. And at one point, he was in first place in all those categories simultaneously. So that says quite a bit about him.
There are the stats. I thought you were asleep at the wheel there. I didn't even research before this because I knew that I was like, oh, Bond's got all that stuff.
No, Mike was definitely going to have those for sure. You already knew that. And, they're good stats. They are stats that they support the case. Goes, what did you want to say?
Well, I wonder if there should be a different category or something, because you're right. Those are great. You can get 15 bonuses and lose 15 fights, though. That's what I'm saying. Like, I wish there was another category for these types of guys, the Donald Cerrones, the Jim Millers, the Joe Lozons, because they did have an impact on the sport. They had an impact on the UFC helping to build the sport. But I just don't know if they stand next to some of the other names that we've brought up. And I wish there was like a different role.
Tough. I mean, I think that's a good. Is Justin Gaethje going to be a Hall of Famer? Is Nate
that's the guy
a Hall of Famer? Like
these are the guys that went through my head as we've been having this discussion. Gaethje was the first one that I thought, because I feel like Cerrone has set a standard for guys who will take a fight anytime, anywhere, and they're action fighters. Justin Gaethje certainly is that type of guy, right? So is he en route to the Hall of Fame when his career is over? And I guess that's the question kind of have. That's the kind of question you have to ask yourself, I think, but I like Goes. Your idea is not bad there, where we have a fight wing, we have a modern era and a pioneer wing, right? Modern wing and a pioneer wing. I don't know what you would call it, but for guys like Cerrone who maybe wouldn't have that sustained excellence, would you call it like the people's wing, the popular, something like that. The popular, I don't know, like,
I mean,
and you could do something like that.
Yeah, I think it's fine sticking with like the modern wing, especially now that in the past couple of years, the UFC has shown a precedence that they're not just doing one person from each wing. If that was the case, and it's just like, okay, it's only going to be one person each year, then your window gets a lot smaller of like who you can induct. But this year we're going to have multiple from each wing, or at least from more than one wing. So if they're going to start doing, 4, 5, 6 people per Hall of Fame class, I think this really gets freed up to do more things with it. But if we're getting like really strict, this person, this wing, I mean, there's obviously people that should be in there before Donald Cerrone.
Yeah, for sure. Just looking at the chat here real quick.
I mean, Bas Rutten fought twice in the UFC, and he's in the Hall of Fame.
There you go.
So
yeah, for sure. Just looking at the chat here, our dude Bo Low Blow Nickel saying he's already Bo Low Blow Nickel's already in the Hall of Fame. So shout out to you, dude. Can't wait till that happens. But George joining us in the chat here too says Gaethje won 2 major titles. He's in. George is pretty definitive.
Interim title and a WSOF belt.
Yeah, that he's definitive that Gaethje's in. So, anyways, guys, all right. I appreciate the conversation. And look, I think this Hall of Fame discussion, it's sort of evolving. And I think Nolan hit the nail on the head earlier when he said, now we know the identity of the UFC as more guys are getting in. And look, if it's lower standards, it's lower standards, and I'm okay with that. If it's not just about titles and victories and all that, but guys like Donald Cerrone, I can come around on guys like Donald Cerrone getting in just because they were great fighters and they gave us what we wanted for all those years.